We're grateful that you give us this time, share your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Ram. So, Janki Ramji was saying that the second shloka can be depressing to sadhaks, it can be a dampener. Actually, what Bhagwan is doing in the first shloka, Bhagwan has pointed out to us that karma, whatever karma is generated, it comes only because of our own past actions, either this lifetimes or previous lifetimes. We are only reaping the fruits of our own action, and God or the creator or ordainer, however we like to think of him or her, is not punishing us or rewarding us. He's only made a rule that says that the fruit of our own action comes back to us. So Bhagwan is saying that action cannot be supreme because mind, intellect, none of them can function unless the self is present. The self is powering it. And like we have discussed during the past two sessions, we forget this most of the time, except when crisis comes into our lives, when somebody close to us passes on, then suddenly we realize that body, mind, and intellect are not in control of themselves, but they are being powered by the presence of the self. So in the second shloka, Bhagwan said, we also learned that every action has mixed results because mind produces the thoughts of the mind, feelings of the mind, whether they are positive or negative, during a task that we perform, that will bring us positive or negative fruits. Physical action, whether it is positive or hurtful or helpful to others, depending on that, you get a positive or a negative karmic fruit. Again, intellect, depending on how well viveka is used, discrimination is used to discriminate between right and wrong, between being beneficial or benevolent towards others, or to think of malevolent thoughts or attitudes towards them. The ideal that we have in life. So all these will give us our fruits. So depending on the state of inner being, mind, intellect, inner state of being, whether it is peaceful, joyful, loving, during any task, we get our karmic fruits. So Bhagwan is saying that from every single desire, a score of desires, sometimes hundreds of desires are born, and each one will bring its own karmic fruit in the process of fulfilling it. So if you are depending only on action, or if you are thinking that only by doing actions, I will be able to get mukti from this life, or I will be able to make my life pleasant all the time, then Bhagwan is showing us the error of this logic in the second shloka. The second shloka, he is telling us, you cannot depend on your action to bring you pleasant fruits all the time, because you are not in control of the mind. Your mind wanders, your mind, vasanas control your mind. So because of that, no action, you cannot be certain that any action will bring in exactly the fruit that you want. Temporary fruit, it will go away. So next three shlokas, Bhagwan is actually telling us what to do about it. So don't just sit in despondency, don't feel helpless, like Jankiram was saying, that thinking of this is making him feel despondent. Bhagwan is taking us in the next three verses that we are going to do today. He is showing us how to use action in the best way possible to take us towards liberation or mukti, to take us towards permanent happiness, to take us towards an understanding of our true nature. So I will just switch to presentation now. Give me a moment. Okay, I think now it's visible to all of you.
Yeah, it's clear better.
Let us chant Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu. Thank you so much, Ravi. Let us keep the mic on Guru Brahma, Gurur Vishnu. Asato ma sat kamaya. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo, Maheshwaraha, Gurur Sakshat, Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Asato ma Satkamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Om Shanti. So we are right now dealing with path of karma yoga, the path of action, root and event of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Sorry?
Your voice is breaking.
My voice is breaking, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Actually,
ಅಷ್ಟು ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ವಾಣಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ
clear
ಆಡಿಯೋ
ಆಗಿಲ್ವಾ?
ಇಲ್ಲ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಬ್ರೇಕ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಮಾ.
Okay, I'll try without. Is this better?
Yes, it's better, Vani.
Yeah,
Very
it's
much better. Yeah, very much better.
Without the
Earphones, I think.
the earphone maybe was not functioning very well today. Okay. So we also understood how Upadesha Saram was composed by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi when Murugannar, one of his disciples, a Tamil poet, was writing a poem, and when Lord Shiva's teaching had to be given, he thought he would request Bhagavan to write the teaching, and these are the teachings that Bhagavan wrote for us. So last time we also understood how karma works in different fashion. Somebody has to mute. I think someone has not muted.
Please mute.
Yeah, thank you.
Few people are on video also.
Sorry?
Video is on. Some people have video on.
Okay, kindly mute everyone.
So we will now go on to the third shloka of Upadesha Saram. Can you see the presentation? Huh?
We can see the presentation, madam.
Presentation is clear also. You're also clear. Yeah. Fine.
Okay, so third shloka. Just before we start, second shloka, we also understood karma acts in two ways. One is from outside through external circumstances or situations. The other is from inside through our karmic residues or vasanas, or what we call conditioning, because each thing that we do will leave behind a footprint. When we keep on getting angry at somebody, it leaves behind footprints of anger, which can get activated easily when some other situation comes up. So this is called vasana or conditioning. Vasana can be positive as well as negative. So let us chant shloka 3. Today, in these shlokas, actually, they are very important shlokas because Bhagwan is giving us pointers, very subtle pointers about how to use action, how to go through the self-realization. So very, very practical, very relevant pointers. Let us begin chanting the shloka 3. I will chant the first line once and we can all repeat together. Ishwararpitam chitashodhakam mukti sadhakam shodhakam mukti sadhakam. So Bhagwan is saying, na ichhaya kritam, the second word in the first line, nechhaya kritam. It means na ichhaya kritam, na without, ichhaya desire, kritam performing. So performing an action without desire for personal gain, without desire that I should get such and such a result from this, that result should come to me, I should reap the fruit, without this kind of desire. When you perform an action, Ishwararpitam. Alternately, you can also offer the fruit of the action to the Lord, whichever form of God you believe in, or whichever concept of God you have, you can offer the fruit of action to the Lord. In either case, whether you perform it without desire for personal gain, or you perform it as an act of worship to the Lord. Chitta is your mind, Shodhakam purifies. So this kind of action purifies your mind. Mukti sadhakam. Mukti, liberation. Sadhakam, it becomes a means. So Bhagwan is saying it leads you towards mukti. It may not grant you mukti directly, but it will further your progress towards mukti by purifying the mind. This time also we recollected, the mind is a big problem for all of us. Sometimes we can control it, many times we can't control it. When we are task oriented, usually we can control the mind. We can think through a process, we can follow that process, bring the task to completion. But otherwise the mind goes into idling mode. Mind becomes, it gets controlled by our tendencies, subconscious tendencies, our vasanas, our conditioning. This will control the mind. So many times it is as though there is a remote functioning. Somebody presses a button, we get angry. Somebody presses another button, we are jealous. Somebody presses another button, we are happy. So we are working on auto mode like a biocomputer. All these vasanas, they make us work on the mode of a biocomputer. They program all our actions. But on one side, they give us the illusion of self-will, that I am free will, I am doing what I want. I have a lot of freedom in making choices. They give us that illusion. There is this OS, there is this computer program, your own past conditioning, our own past conditioning. That is actually making your choices. That is actually making your decisions. Unless we go on very consciously using viveka or discrimination. So because of this, biocomst of the time is not under our control. It keeps on jumping from one emotion to another, from one tantrum to another, from one thought to another. So we cannot the root of action. So conditioning is removed from, a lot of vasanas have to be deleted from the mind. So this process of deletion, there is no button where we can say delete. But this process of deletion can happen when we action without looking for a personal gain from that, or doing every action as an act of worship to the Lord without again expecting any result from it. So for this, I have two stories which will help us to understand how the process of where we said that when there is 50% good karma, 50% bad karma, according to Sri Shankaracharya, we get a human birth or a human body. So even in a human body, we have to go through a process of refinement. In the beginning, we are thinking only about ourselves. Then slowly we become other-centered. Then from being other-centered, we understand that the fruit of any action is temporary, and we start looking for something that is permanent, something that is eternal. So this is, for most of us, it is a step-by-step journey. It doesn't happen all of a sudden. For some, it may be a sudden mutational jump. For most people, it is step-by-step. So we will look at two stories. One is a true incident for miser. I don't know, we are stuck with stories of misers. Even last time we were looking at another lady who was very miserly. So now we are looking, the changes, we are looking at a man. So there is this very miserly man living in a village during the times of Guru Nanak. He has earned a lot of money and he has kept it very safe. The only thing that starts bothering him is, okay, I have so much wealth with me, but when I die, what will happen to all this wealth? I want to find out some method by which I can take this wealth with me when I die. So he goes to the priest of the temple in his village. The priest is bathing in the river when he goes, and after his bath he comes out and he says, my son, what can I do for you? So then this miser says, look, I want to take all my wealth. I have a big amount of wealth with me. When I die, I want to take it with me. Please tell me of some method. So this priest sits and laughs. And he says, do you know anybody who, you have seen so many people die. How many of them have taken their houses, their gold, their silver, their ornaments, their money? Have you seen anybody take it with them? What kind of childish question are you asking? This is possible. It's impossible. And he goes away. So this miser is not ready to accept this kind of an answer. So any Pandit who comes to the village, any spiritual teacher who comes to the village, he goes and he asks the same question. How can I take my wealth with me when I die? Then one day Guru Nanak, he is traveling and he comes to that village and he is sitting under a tree, and this miser hears about his greatness. So he goes and falls at his feet and he says, I have a burning question. And so far, nobody has been able to give me a satisfactory answer. Can you please help me? So Nanak Ji says, yes, my son, tell me what you want. So the miser says, you know, I'm a very, very rich man. I'm a millionaire. But my worry is, when I die, how can I take this wealth with me? So Nanak says, you have earned this wealth. So therefore it is yours. There should be a way to take it. You have a right to take it with you. And I know of a way where you can take it. But first tell me, have you traveled to foreign countries anytime? The miser says, yes, I'm a businessman. So to buy things, to sell things, I have traveled to other countries. So Guru Nanak says, then in other countries, can you use the currency of your own country? Myself says, surely not. I have to exchange it for the currency of that particular country. So Nanak Ji says, it's the same here, my son. When you die, you can't take this currency there. You have to change the currency. The currency of heaven is called punya, good karmic fruits. So you have to convert all this money into punya now when you are alive here, so that when you die, it will be in an account and it will get automatically transferred to you and you will go to heaven. So this man is very happy. Nanak says the way to do punya, build hospitals, build orphanages, do a lot to help the poor, build hostels for poor people, keep on doing good work. So the miser starts doing all this because he wants to convert his wealth into punya, and through punya he wants to go to heaven. So this story, through this story, we are actually understanding that how a person who is thinking only about himself, the man, the miser, he could have shared his wealth from in the beginning itself with others. He could have helped others. He could have set up philanthropic institutions, but he didn't do it. Why? Because he wanted everything for himself. Only when Guru Nanak gave him a solution and he said, by sharing with others, when you hold and you don't share, you generate papa or you generate bad karmic fruits. When you share, you generate good karmic fruits. And by generating good karmic fruits, finally you are benefiting yourself. So still with self-benefit in mind, slowly a person who is totally focused on his own comfort zone will start reaching out to help others. Initially still with the feeling that this is going to benefit me. So next step. This is a story from the Bhagavata. So in this story, says Narada. Says Narada is a great devotee of Lord Vishnu, and it is said, taking his Tanpura, he keeps traveling through all the different worlds. So one day, says the Bhagavatam, says Narada came down to the earth to a place very close to Mathura. So there, King Chitraketu was ruling. He had many queens. Kritadyuti was his first queen, but he was a very good king. His subjects were very happy. Land was peaceful, full of abundance, but he had no son. So when says Narada came, at the same time says Angiras also came. So the king gave them hospitality. He showed great reverence to them. And then he said, I'm very happy for your blessings. Because of that, my kingdom is doing really well. And all of us are happy. I have only one concern, that I don't have a prince, have a son to take over after me. So can you please grant me the boon of a son? So says Angiras performs a yajna, havan. He takes the prasad of that, gives it to the king, and he says, give this to your first queen, the eldest queen. So the queen takes it, but King Angiras says, this son, a son will be born. This son will bring you both happiness and sorrow. The king and queen don't really listen much to this. They're overjoyed, and the queen conceives, and a very beautiful son is born to them. Both the king and queen are ecstatic, and they're distributing distributing gifts to the poor. They're doing a lot of good things to celebrate. A few months pass, a year, 2 years. The other queens start becoming jealous because they don't have any progeny, they don't have any children, and only the eldest queen has a child. The king and queen are so happy to have the son, they start getting jealous. So they plot together and they poison this small boy and he dies. Their plot is not known. They think the son has died because of some illness. The king and queen are devastated. Everybody is grieving. Even the younger queens, they pretend to grieve. At that time, again, King Angiras and Narada, they come back. And the king and queen, they plead, please do something, our son is dead. So Angiras says, O king, in fact, the last time when Narada and I came, we came to initiate you into the path of self-knowledge. We thought you were ripe for it. So that is why we came. But you said you wanted a son. So we decided you are not yet mature. You need a little more experience. So we gave you the boon of a son. Now your son is born and the son is dead also. Each body has an expiry date on it when it comes into this world. The date is not visible to us. It depends on the karma of that person. So such was the karma of the son who was born to you. But understand, all that is born will also die. All that comes into being will change. Therefore, don't depend on external things for your happiness. Begin your search for eternal happiness by finding out your own nature, by understanding your own nature. The king he's listening, but he's not yet satisfied. So Narada says, I will call your baby son. So the Jivatma, the part of the consciousness which was identifying with the body of the son, it appears. And King Narada says, it is the wish of your parents that you should come back into your body, grow up in it, take up the responsibilities of the kingdom. So that boy laughs. He says, which parents? I have taken millions of births till now. Animal births, human births, all kinds of births depending upon my karma. I have had so many parents. Which parents? I have had so many bodies. Which body do you want me to occupy? It is of no use. You keep on, I've been traveling from womb to womb, from tomb to tomb, and I have realized the only way is to find out the nature of oneself and to abide in it. That is the only way that you will get permanent happiness. Otherwise, it is like wandering in a desert looking for water. You get one glass of water, you're happy. After some time, you want one more glass of water. It's endless. So I'm not going to come back to any body. And he goes away. So then King Chitraketu understands. He understands that whatever fruit you get, it is transitory. Whether it is happy or whether it is sad, it will pass away. So he decides that he wants to begin the journey of self-knowledge. He wants to understand what is his true nature. He wants to be established in bliss. So this is the next part of the journey. So in the first part of the journey, a sadhaka understands whatever I do, I will get better results if I share with others. So self-centeredness slowly becomes other-centeredness. You also start caring for other people. Initially, it is out of selfishness, but slowly chitta shodhakam, mind starts getting purified. You see how happy people are. You see that something that would have meant a small pleasure to you means a difference between life and death for another person. So slowly mind starts getting purified. But still you are dependent on outer things for happiness, all of us. Then when you start realizing, like Bhagavan says, whatever comes is temporary. It cannot give you permanent peace. It cannot give you permanent happiness. Because you are peace. You yourself are bliss. Why are you looking outside? Why are you simply searching outside for happiness? Look within. Get established in your true nature. So this is the journey through Karma Yoga. So in the Ramayana, once Rama asks Hanuman, Hanuman, you are my greatest devotee. So I have a question. Just define our relationship. So Hanuman says, this is a very famous statement. I think all of you will know it. He says, as the body-mind complex, I am your servant and you are my master. As individual consciousness or the jiva, I am your part and you are the whole. As pure consciousness, you and I are one. So this journey that we are all undertaking, how we think of God, it depends on where we are on this journey. If I'm identifying with my body, mind, and intellect, and I think that is me, only that is me, then I will look upon God also as a form, separate from me, and I will have some kind of relationship. We have Navavidha Bhakti. I can be a servant of the Lord. I can be a friend of the Lord. Lord can be my beloved as he was to Mirabai. Lord can be my friend as he was to Kuchela. Lord can be my son, Vatsalya, as he was to Yashoda. So depending upon my temperament, I can look upon the Lord and have a relationship. But slowly, if I start thinking, I'm not just this body, I'm a reincarnating entity. I have lived in many bodies. I will live in many bodies maybe. Therefore, I'm a tiny bit of consciousness, an individual consciousness called the Jivatma. And I am a part, I am a spark from the fire called the Paramatma. So that is another concept. But if I go straight to the root and I say, I am pure consciousness and you are pure consciousness, that means God is also pure consciousness. In essence, God and I are one. So this actually symbolizes, or it puts it in a nutshell, our journey. And this journey is only internal. Nothing happens externally. If you look at this slide, at the bottom of the slide, we have a caterpillar and a butterfly. We all know the story, how the caterpillar builds a cocoon, and then after some 14 days, it comes out of the cocoon as a beautiful butterfly. So transformation, we use that word very, very often. But in spirituality, what do we mean by transformation? We say, I'm focusing on transformation. We say, this organization is a center for spiritual transformation. So what are we meaning when we say transformation? If you look at the dictionary, there are two definitions for transformation basically, which apply to spirituality. Transform. So the form changes, change in form. That is what we see, caterpillar becoming a butterfly. So if we are thinking that spirituality means my body will remain ever young or youthful, it will become glowing, it will become radiant, or this body will become immortal. Then Bhagavan says that is not what we are looking for, because the very nature of the body is that it is born, it changes, and it dies. That is the law of creation. Others may feel the mind gets transformed. Mind becomes, it acquires a lot of supernatural powers. I will become telepathic. I will be able to understand other people's thoughts or read their thoughts. I can move objects using my thoughts, telekinesis, or I can look into the future and I will be able to know what is going to happen in the future. So these are hidden qualities of the mind. It is a potential of the mind, but still we are in the realm of the mind. That means still we are subject to vasanas. So that is also not what we are looking for in spiritual transformation. So this has been struck out. Vedanta gives an example. There are many examples. I have taken only one here. We are walking, it's sort of dusk or early morning. Maybe we are in the garden. Suddenly we see a snake. Naturally, if you see a snake, you're terrified. You don't know whether it's poisonous or not. You don't try to see what it is, but you just want to run away from there. And we run into the house, then other people come, and it's by then it's much brighter, the sun is up, and then you see in the bright light, you can make out it's just a rope. It was looking like a snake, but it's only a rope. And we start laughing. It might have happened to many people. It's a very plausible thing to happen. So here Vedanta is asking us, was there a snake first and then did it become a rope? No, we know that we understood that it was a rope all along, because there wasn't enough light. It looked just like a rope in its stance and its texture and in its size. So we thought it is a rope. So the mind superimposed the form of a snake onto the rope. But the rope was always a rope. So in the same way, Vedanta is saying, Bhagavan is saying, your spiritual transformation, so when it became a rope, what changed was only your understanding. First, your understanding was that it was a snake. Afterwards, your understanding is that it is a rope. And it has been a rope all along. So it was your mind that superimposed the snake on the rope. Later on, it was your mind that understood there is no snake there at all. It is only a rope. It may still look like a snake in the dusk. It may look exactly like a snake in the dusk. But you are not going to be fooled again, because you have understood it is a rope. So Bhagavan is saying, when you understand that this body, mind and intellect, that is not you. Your mind is thinking, it is just a thought, it is just a belief. You think that it is you. But through sadhana, through Jnana Yoga, you understand, through self-inquiry, you understand, this is not me, it was never me. I am the self. It has always been that you are the self, but we didn't understand. But now we have understood. So the change is only in the understanding. Change is only in the awareness level. So that is spiritual transformation. Understanding that it has always been so, but we have not been able to understand it. So it is a change in right definition of spiritual transformation. Now, how do you offer your actions to the Lord? So for that, I have just taken two examples. Devotees of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Bhagavan once said, I am afraid only of two people. Imagine Bhagavan being afraid. He said, I am afraid only of two people. Everybody was waiting. Who are these two people that Bhagavan himself is afraid of? And he said, one is Ramanatha Brahmachari and the other is Mudaliyar Pati. Both of them were very humble devotees of Bhagavan. So very briefly, we'll see why Bhagavan made that statement about them. Of course, jocularly, but still, what he meant was their surrender, their intensity of devotion was such that if they asked him for something, he could never refuse because they were in a total state of surrender to him. So he said, if they come and if they ask me something, then I have to say yes. So that is why I am scared of them. He was joking. So Ramanatha Brahmachari, he was actually a teenage boy who was staying in a Veda Patashala, a residential school where they were teaching him Vedas. And one day he went up to the Virupaksha cave. You see, I put the photographs of Virupaksha cave. I think it's kind of nice to see, instead of just imagining, we have the makes it story much more real. So met Bhagavan. From that day, he was convinced Ramana is my master. So he, with Ramana's permission, he left the Patashala. He would go every day to learn, but he shifted his place of residence to Virupaksha cave. Because he was not staying in the Patashala, he would not eat there. He was given free food there, but he refused that. He would go into the town, beg for food, bring it to the cave, up the hill, sit and share with Bhagavan. Bhagavan's mother also came to live with him at that time. So he would do chores like washing dishes, washing her clothes, cleaning the cave, outside, inside, all such tasks he would undertake. Then one day, his devotion was very intense. So as he grew up, he lived there and he grew up. And Bhagavan told him, Ramanatha, you are enlightened. You have understood yourself. Bhagavan said, of course. Bhagavan says simply. Then Ramanatha said, Bhagavan, I don't believe you. So Bhagavan came and he knuckled, like this, Ramanatha's head, very playfully, and he said, yes, Ramanatha, you are enlightened. You have understood your true nature. You have understood that it was only your mind that was binding you. You are free from the belief that you are the body, mind, and intellect. So Ramanatha was very happy. He went outside and he started dancing. And the other devotees came. Ramanatha, what has happened to you? Ramanatha was just, even after he grew up, he was very short, about 4 feet 6 inches tall. So he was like a general pet to everybody. And people came and said, what happened, Ramanatha? Why are you just jumping around like this? So Ramanatha said, Bhagavan touched my head. To him, the fact that Bhagavan touched his head was much more important than the fact that he was enlightened. So such was his devotion. He didn't serve only Bhagavan. Bhagavan says the amount of selfless service that Ramanatha did is amazing. Many foreign visitors had come to the ashram. They didn't have a place to stay. So Tiruvannamalai, and huts were built there and many devotees stayed there. So Ramanatha would go to Palakottu and he would tell all these devotees, you don't simply waste your time. You have come here from other countries, you have come here from other places, or you may have come from this place, but your purpose is to spend time with Bhagavan and get self-knowledge. So all of you go to the ashram, sit in front of Bhagavan, and then he would sweep their huts, he would make it clean, he would put oil into their lamps, he would cook their food sometimes, he would wash their dishes, he would go into the town. He didn't have a bag or anything, he was a poor boy. He would fold up his dhoti, fill it with all the things that these people needed, all the provisions, bring it and put it in their huts. And then he would go to the ashram and still manage to spend some time with Bhagavan. So he never felt that he had done anything for anybody. He never felt that he needs to be rewarded for his actions, or people should recognize him, or people should say thank you. He had absolutely no expectations. Sometimes people would come by late night trains to the ashram and all the ashramites would be asleep by 7:30 in the evening. So Ramanatha would get up, he would make food for them, he would serve them, take them to their rooms, make sure of their comfort, and nobody else would know about it. He would not even tell anyone, I'm doing all these things. Round the clock, he kept working for the devotees of Bhagavan, for Bhagavan, expecting nothing in return. So Bhagavan always said, Ramanatha is a karma yogi. He does nishkama karma. Nishkama means without desire. Kama is desire, nishkama is without personal desire. He just does it because he wants to serve people. Now Mudaliyar Party. She was living in a village near Tiruvannamalai and she was serving a sadhu. And on the last day, when the sadhu was just going to die, Party asked him, Party means the name by which that sadhu, now you are leaving your body, whom will I serve henceforth? So that sadhu said, don't worry, you go to Tiruvannamalai, there is a sage called Ramana Maharshi, so please serve that sage. So she came, when she came to Tiruvannamalai itself, she was quite an old lady. She went up to the Virupaksha cave, she saw Bhagavan, and then and there she decided, till the end of my days, I will keep on cooking food for Bhagavan. Cooking for Bhagavan also meant cooking for his devotees, because Bhagavan never ate anything alone. Whoever was there, whatever food was there, it would be shared equally between all of them. So she started cooking and taking food up to the cave. She was a poor lady. So slowly she sold off all her possessions one by one so that she can buy provisions. Bhagavan has not asked her for food. Bhagavan expects nothing from her, but out of deep love of her own heart, she has felt that she should cook the food. So one by one she sells off all her possessions to buy provisions and cook for Bhagavan. Finally, she has nothing left. We are not talking about 1 year or 2 years. She came in 1910 and I think she passed away in 1950 or 49. So you can do the maths. So almost 40 years that we are talking about. 40 years, every single day she has cooked a meal for Bhagavan and his devotees. In the end, several years, she had no possessions. She had a little bit of money, just a few annas. She would go and buy till sesame from the market, take oil out of those seeds, sell the oil, and whatever profit came, with that profit she would buy provisions, she would cook food and take it to Bhagavan. So in the end, she also became blind. And when she went to the ashram, By then, Bhagwan had shifted to the foot of the hill, the ashram that we see nowadays. She would go there still, take her food and give it to Bhagwan. Then one day, one devotee who didn't know much about her, he said, "Grandmother, why do you come here party simply? You can't see, you're blind, you can't even see Bhagwan. Simply, why do you come here every day?" So she said, "Are, yes, I am blind, I can't see Bhagwan, but can't Bhagwan see me? Every time when his gaze falls upon me, am I not blessed? I don't come here because I want to see Bhagwan. I come here to serve Bhagwan. That's all, nothing else." And so even on the last day of her life, she cooked a meal. She was not able to carry it because she was very sick, but she cooked the food and it was taken to the ashram and given to Bhagwan. And when she asked, "Has Bhagwan eaten the food?" She was assured, yes, it has been served to Bhagwan. Bhagwan has eaten the food that was cooked by you. She said, now I am satisfied. She closed her eyes and her life was gone. She drew her last breath. So look at the dedication. These are not rich people. These are not privileged people. They are villagers. In spite of that, every single act they spontaneously offered to whoever they believed was their Lord. For them, the Lord was Ramana Maharshi. And their entire life was spent like that, not just now and then. People may give to charities when they remember, or when somebody comes and asks, or because they have said, "This much I will give every year or every month or something." But here, these people didn't even bother about themselves. There was no thought about their own or their own benefit. All the time it was directed to others. It was directed to God. So this is what Bhagwan is. Bad actions, that means actions that hurt other people, then you will get unpleasant fruits. If you do good actions, that means actions that benefit other people, that are helpful to other people, then you will get pleasant fruits. But both are chains, both will bind you. You need to come back to this earthly plane. You have to occupy a body in order to experience good or bad. Is it audible? Is it audible? Can somebody tell me whether the voice is clear?
Sometimes your voice is not audible, madam.
Shall I shift the place? Will you give me 1 minute to just shift?
Okay, madam. Yeah.
Okay. We were talking about Mudalayar party. So Bhagwan is saying that this kind of other-centeredness, even in our prayer of the school, we say the same thing. We say, "O hidden life vibrant in every atom, O hidden light shining in every creature." So that means we are aware of this self or consciousness. It is powering not only our own intellect, it is powering every single creature. It is there in every atom. So such people, they move from being centered on their own comfort, their mind and heart, it gets so purified through selfless action, through action that is not seeking any personal benefit. So because of that, they are able to move from you can't say consciousness expands, but their concept of self will keep on expanding. Consciousness neither expands nor shrinks, because consciousness is everywhere all the time already. But what we have, the concept we have about ourselves, that will start expanding to include all beings. It will start expanding to include all of creation. It will start just exploding with love. So when that happens, it is easy to drop this false identity of the body, mind, and intellect. And then, because of intense internal purification, even the small bit of sadhana that they do, the self-inquiry that they do, it will take them and establish them in the self. So this is what Bhagavan is telling us through the through the third shloka. How are we doing for time? What's the time now?
7:05.
It is
7:05.
7:05. Okay. So let us chant the fourth shloka together. I'll chant first, we can all repeat. Kaya vangmanaha karyamuttamam, Kaya vangmanaha karyamuttamam, Pujanam japa chintanam krama, Pujanam japa chintanam krama. So Bhagavan is saying, Kaya, Vak, Manaha. Kaya is the body, Vak is speech, Manaha is the mind. Karyam Uttamam. So in that order, whatever we perform, the action we perform through the mind is better than the action we perform through speech, which is better than the action that we perform through the body. So he's giving us a scale for sadhana. Many of us may have thought, which sadhana is the most powerful? Which sadhana should I focus on? Which will take me closer to the goal quickly? So these are all thoughts I'm sure we've all had at some time or the other. So here Bhagavan is saying, Pujanam japaha chintanam kramat. Pujanam, any kind of ritual which is performed using the body. Japaha, chanting a mantra using speech. Chintanam. Chintanam can also be contemplation, but chintanam in this case also means meditation. So if I just read the translation once, the mind is better than speech and speech is better than the body. Puja is performed with the body, japa with speech, and meditation with the mind. Meditation is better than japa, and japa is better than puja. So Bhagavan is not saying give up puja. Many of us may be having the habit of performing a ritual in the morning or evening or whatever time suits us. We may have a favorite deity. There may be a form that is very beloved to us. So we may get the question, then should I drop it? No, we need not drop anything. But Bhagavan is saying, be aware that whatever you do through the body, it has power. But what you do with the speech, because it's a subtler instrument, is more powerful than what you do with the body. And mind is a even subtler instrument. So what you do with the mind is powerful than either of the others. So this is a scale he is giving us. So if we just look at this, if you look at the physical world, on the left, at the top, I have put a picture of mechanical energy. That means a blacksmith using a hammer and an anvil. That also generates a lot of energy. It can do a lot of things. It can shape iron into usable articles for us. It is useful. Compared to that, below that, we have a hydroelectric turbine. So this produces electrical energy, which is more powerful. It can power very big apparatus or very big equipment. Below that, we have the picture of an atom. So we have nuclear energy. By splitting an atom or through fission of an atom, we can generate much more energy. So the subtler, the more powerful it is. On the right hand side, we have dinosaurs. We would have seen a movie called Jurassic Park, where once again dinosaurs came, from the DNA in a mosquito which was found in a fossil, and there was an egg and the eggs hatched and dinosaurs came. And they created a lot of ravage. But today, if we look, I think this coronavirus is a very familiar picture now. If a few dinosaurs came to the earth, I think we have enough equipment, we have helicopters, we have weapons. Maybe we could have dealt with them much more easily than we are able to deal with this tiny virus on the head of a pin. We have these small pins, stationary item. On a pinhead, you can put about 50 million viruses at a time. That's how small they are. But if you just see how they're holding up the entire world to ransom right now. They've changed our whole life. So even in the physical universe, what is small, what is subtle, has more power than what is big. It can transform, it can bring about a very big transformation. Either in the case of corona, probably mostly negative, but it may be doing good things which we don't know. But in the case of sadhana, we are talking about good things, good transformation. So here, if you see, I've just created a sort of pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid, we have havans being performed or puja being performed. Then above that, we have japa, and then we have swadhyaya, manana, that means contemplation, chanting and contemplation. And then at the very top, we have meditation. How to do japa, how to do meditation. Again, in future shlokas, Bhagavan gives us very detailed guidelines. Which kind of japa is the most powerful? Which kind of meditation is the most powerful? How should we perform meditation? Right now, he is laying the foundation for us to understand which kind of sadhana is more effective. But when any sadhana becomes unnecessary for us, it drops away on its own. So we need not, if you are very fond of some kind of sadhana, which doesn't figure at the top of this particular pyramid, it doesn't mean Bhagavan never expected anybody to drop their sadhana. When somebody who had been doing japa for a long time, they came to Bhagavan and asked Bhagavan, Bhagavan, I've been repeating this mantra for a long time. What more sadhana should I do? If that person was benefiting from that sadhana, and he or she would be better off doing that sadhana at that time, then Bhagavan would simply say, yes, that sadhana is very good, you keep on doing it. So he didn't tell anybody you stop doing puja or you stop doing japa. But some people he would gently guide. Someone who was ready, he would take them in a transition. Once a person came and asked, so Bhagavan said, continue your japa, but each time you repeat the mantra, be aware of who is repeating the mantra. Till now you are focusing on the repetition of the mantra itself. Maybe Om Namah Shivaya, or maybe Om, or whatever the mantra that you are saying. Instead of being aware of the mantra, keeping your attention all the time on the mantra, shift your attention to who is aware of the mantra. So what happened? He's shifting that person very slowly he is making him transit from Japa Yoga to Atma Vichara or self-enquiry, because he is making him aware of the witness. So this is the way Bhagwan would guide. He would never make drastic changes, or he never condemned anybody for whatever sadhana they were doing. He only said, if that becomes unnecessary for you, it will drop on its own. It will drop, just like a dry leaf drops from a tree. So don't get into conflict mode, but be aware that this is the scale. So this is the last shloka we are going to do for today, and it is also the last shloka in Karma Yoga, 5th shloka of Upadesha Saram. I will chant, we can chant together. Jagata Ishadhi Yukta Sevanam, Jagata Ishadhi Yukta Sevanam, Ashtamurti Bhradeva Pujanam, Ashtamurti Bhradeva Pujanam. So, Jagata Ishadhi Yukta Sevanam. Look upon the entire Jagat or the world as being permeated or pervaded by divine energy. Ishadhi Yukta Sevanam. Serve the Lord, as serve the world, because the world is the manifestation of the Lord. The creation has come from the Creator. The Creator is immanent. He is present in every atom of creation, in every creature of creation. Therefore, by serving the Lord's creation, you are serving the Lord Himself. Ashtamurti. The world is a Ashtamurti. It is made up of, it has 8 components. Murti is form, Ashta is 8. Vrid Deva Pujanam. The 8 formed Lord. Worship such a Lord. So what are these 8 forms? Here Bhagwan says they are the 5 elements. That means sky, air, fire, water, and earth. Moon. Moon is symbolic of the mind. Sun is symbolic of intellect. And Purusha or consciousness. The Lord of the city, Purusha. That means the ruler of the city. Everything is a city. This body is a city, and the ruler is consciousness. This whole, every atom is a city. It has electrons, it has protons, it has nucleus. So that is a micro mini city. Even that is ruled by consciousness. So whether you look at microcosm or the macrocosm, it is all ruled by consciousness. So Bhagwan is saying, whatever you do, in Chandogya Upanishad, we get this Mahavakya, Sarvam Khaluvidam Brahma. Everything, Khalu means indeed, verily. Everything indeed is Brahman. So once through Karma Yoga, by expanding the concept of the self to include everybody in it, as the Karma Yogi advances on the path, he can serve the Lord through any action, through every aspect of creation, through any aspect of creation. I had gone to my friend's house before this lockdown started. So she is a very pious person. She does puja every day and all that. So she was saying, you know, my daughter, I'm happy with her in every way, the wonderful person, but she doesn't seem to believe in God at all the way we believe. I said, why? No, all the time she's working for the environment. Plastic should not be used. Everything should be green. We should not do anything to harm the environment. So she's engaged in that all the time. So Bhagwan here is saying that is also serving the Lord. You're working to make the creation a better place. You're serving the Lord. You're cooking for your family, you're serving the Lord. You're bathing your own body, you're serving the Lord, because consciousness is there in your body also. You are helping an old person, you're serving the Lord. You, through your profession, you're offering service in different ways to society. You may be a doctor, you're treating patients, especially in things like this, it is so vital. Or you may be a lawyer or a judge, you're fighting for justice. You may be a mason, you may be a gardener, you may be anybody. You may be engaging in any activity. Most of us have this excuse, I'm very busy, I don't have time for spirituality. So Bhagavan is laughing. He's saying, there is no place where God is not there. God is there in every atom. So anything that you do is offering service to the Lord. It is offering worship to the Lord. So through every single act, if you have the right understanding, every act can become an act of worship. Every thing that you do, the smallest thing to the biggest thing that we do every day, it can be done with the inner conviction, I am serving the Lord right now. If you're eating food, I am feeding the Lord who is inside. If I'm serving somebody, I am feeding the Lord who is in front of me. So it just, again, the flip is only in the understanding. So through this entire 5 shlokas, Bhagavan has given an understanding of how karma works, how action works, how being is more important than doing, how any fruit of action is limited, it is transient. We get mixed bags of karma, and karma itself, understanding it, you can use it if you perform acts without expectation of personal benefit, or if you do it out of total love and devotion to God, expecting nothing else from it. It can liberate you from the chain of future karmic fruits. Whether we get good karma or bad karma, we understood it limits us, because we have to come back to this body to enjoy those fruits. And in the period of enjoyment, we may produce more fruits. But if we offer the fruit to the Lord through this feeling that whatever I do, I'm serving the Lord, then you are not generating any karmic fruits. You are liberated from the future shackles of karma. Whatever is in the present has come from the past. But in the present, every action that we perform, it will not bind us either with a golden chain of punya or with a iron chain of papa. So this is what we have learned so far in brief. So let us look at what stop sharing. Okay. Voice clear, not break. To hear clearly. Okay. Prayer, can prayer be chanted like japa? So I think japa normally is repetition of a mantra. We will go on repeating that mantra again and again. It's now usually a short mantra, 3 words, 4 words, or in the case of Gayatri mantra, it can be a little longer. So you go on repeating that mantra many times. That is called a japa. Whereas a prayer can be even just a spontaneous, oh, may everybody in this world be happy. It's a spontaneous, simple prayer that comes from the heart, for which you need not use a mantra also. So that is the difference. Japa is done as a sadhana. It is done in order to purify the mind. It is done in order to go further on the path of spirituality. Whereas prayer can be just you're offering your gratitude, or you're asking God for something, or you're praying for the welfare of everybody. So it can be either Kamya Prarthana or Nishkama Prarthana. It can be for your own benefit, or it can be for the benefit of Lokahita or for others. The story of the miser continued to do good acts only for his own personal benefit will carry him, then can we term that act as Karma Yoga? See, Karma Yoga, like we said, is a transition. Everybody immediately cannot come into Karma Yoga. Even now, the actions that we do from morning till evening, it may not all come under the bracket of Nishkama Karma. If we are honest with ourselves, a good part of it is to benefit ourselves, a good part of it is to benefit immediate family members. So it takes time for somebody to get to that place where Mudalayar Party or Ramanatha Brahmachari, or so it is a transitory period. So for him, it was a big change. He was hoarding his wealth and he was not parting with a bit of his money for anybody. And even though he is still doing it for his own benefit, at least he has started using it for the welfare of others. To that extent, you can call it as Karma Yoga. We all know that one can transform our actions in this life through Nishkama Karma. But what can we do to wipe out our Prarabdha Karma? I have read somewhere that the seeds of past karma may be burnt in the fire of wisdom or by the grace of a master like Sri Ramana. Any thoughts on this? If we look at an astronaut who is in space, he has to be very careful because there is no gravity. He is just floating in space. For us who have been experiencing the gravitational field of the earth all this time, it is difficult to conceive of a gravity-free space. So Prarabdha Karma is providing only the, what shall we say, the location, the setting. But the happiness or unhappiness that comes from facing different situations, it comes from the turbulence within us only. We like something, we don't like something. We are happy with something, we are not happy with something. We want something, we don't want something. So in Kannada, Badukkidu Jataka Bandi, DVG has said. We travel in limousines or something with very good suspension, still if there are potholes, we feel it. But imagine in a bullock cart, which had no suspension, and you're traveling on a road, every small bump will be like a big jolt to you. So when we are depending on external circumstances and we allow the mind to interpret what is happy, what is not unhappy, we are totally bound by gravity. Just however much I jump, I may be a big high jumper. I jump, but I have to come back to earth again and again. But grace is external, grace is also internal. When my mind starts becoming more and more equipoised, if you look at the story of the king and the queen and the baby prince, Chitraketu. As long as he is dependent on external circumstances, he is unhappy. But once he realizes he himself is bliss, that is grace. So for that grace to happen, a master like Ramana Maharshi can show the way. He will say, look inwards, understand your true nature, do this, it will help you. But actually walking the path we have to do. So our own grace is very, very essential for this. So we have to make up our minds. We should be consistent in this. We should not keep on slipping and sliding from the awareness of what is the self. Vedanta has told me what is the self. Ramana has told me what is the self. I have intellectually understood. I should rearrange my life, reorganize my life, reorganize my mind, reorganize my activities, everything according to this new understanding. So when all this starts happening, prarabdha karma can manifest outside in the form of situations. But inside, if I am equipoised, inside, if I have understood whatever is coming is a fruit of my past action, but I am bliss. I am not this body, mind, and intellect. Whatever happens to this, it does not affect me internally. Then, even if prarabdha keeps manifesting, internally the experience is only bliss. So Bhagavan says this is the best way in which you can not stop prarabdha, you're not interfering with it at all, but internally you're not affected by what is happening outside. You're playing your role very efficiently, you're doing everything that needs to be done, but you're unaffected by the prarabdha that is manifesting outside. So that is what Vedanta and Ramana say about this. Though Ramana Maharshi is not here, can we still take him to be our guru, or do we necessarily have to have a living guru in the present? We can take Ramana as our guru. We need to feel that bonding. We need to feel that whatever he is teaching us is the right thing for us. We need to feel that affinity, that love. Then we can take Ramana or any Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or anybody as our guru. At some point in our journey, we will require a living guru also. When that point comes, because when a living guru comes, we can clear our doubts, we can talk to him, he can guide us. When that requirement comes, it will happen. If we are very sincere in following the teachings, if our surrender is 100%, then automatically when the right time comes, if there is the need for another living guru, that guru will walk into our lives on his own or on her own. So definitely we can surrender to any guru, even if that guru is not taken a physical form, we can surrender to that guru and begin walking the path, and things will happen in the way that is the best